Welcome back. Over the last year, folks, pensioners have been feeling the pinch as their yearly income has fallen by around 600 quid. It's the cost of living and prices of essential items rising 3 times faster than the state pension. By the age of 85, pensioners will be £14,000 worse off after the suspension of the triple lock. That means that pensioners would need an additional £878 per year in order to keep up with the cost of living crisis. So who's responsible for filling the gap, and how much of it should be paid by the youngest generations? How much support should pensioners realistically be able to expect? Well, joining me now to discuss this is the host and director of Reasoned, a Conservative YouTube channel, Jess Gill, and the political commentator, Monica I cannot say that. Ujkalnita. I beg your pardon, Monica.
Yes,
Jess,
every time.
I do beg your pardon. Where do you stand, Jess, on this? Do you think we should actually have the triple lock in place, or do you see it as part of a wider intergenerational inequality problem?
I just think this is completely unfair to young people. At the end of the day, everyone is suffering with the cost of living crisis, and young people and just middle-aged workers aren't having their wages adjusted with inflation. Everyone's suffering during this, and I hate this idea of age warfare. I don't think it's fair that the state's created this problem, which is dividing people. Like, I don't want to be beefing with my grandma on this issue, you know? And I think we need to support each other during this hard time. I don't think it's useful to be having a go at each other on this issue. I think we need to support old people as well as young people who are both very much impacted by this cost of living crisis.
Monica, how about you then? Do you think is there any argument at all to say that there is a real deep intergenerational inequality here, that young people are paying far too much for what could be wealthy pensioners? I know one pensioner friend of mine describes his winter fuel allowance as his champagne fund.
Absolutely. I mean, I think quite differently to Jess. I think it's our duty as young people to put the most vulnerable group to the top of our list of priorities when it comes to spending. Most of the elderly rely on the state pension as their main source of income. And to take that away from the people who need it the most, to me, is completely foolish. You know, as a 24-year-old, it would be really easy for me to say, well, it's not my problem if the elderly are struggling, and it's not my responsibility to pick up on the slack on behalf of them. But that argument is so self-indulgent in nature and lacking an understanding of the importance that a state pension has in our society. You know, state pensions are not a benefit. State pensions are earned. They're earned through taxes and a monthly payment into the system. And a full pension takes 35 to 40 years of contributions and a lot of hard work to actually build itself up. I think that for a 20-something-year-old who has had a couple of years of work at best, to say that that's okay is just, it's very entitled to me and self-indulgent, really.
Jess, do you worry that this will come full circle, that actually this generation will need to be supported? Eventually you will retire, but I worry that actually the retirement age will be so high, Jess, that many of us won't see our pensions at this rate.
Well, yeah, exactly. We have an ageing population at the moment. And on the topic of helping the most vulnerable, 1 in 4 pensioners are millionaires. I think there should be a means-adjusted pension. At the end of the day, everyone's struggling. And when we're talking about, when I get to 70-odd, who's going to pay for my pension? My generation and your generation, Darren, Zoomers and Millennials, we're not reproducing at the same rate. No one is going to be able to pay for that support which we're paying for the boomers. And again, I don't think that's a sustainable way to support the elderly in society.
Yeah, Jess, but what about the pensioners who, you're right, they do own assets, they own houses, for example, but it's not pensioners' faults. For example, if you bought your house under Margaret Thatcher's right to buy, that actually you've seen a massive increase in the worth of that asset, thanks to the housing crisis that we face in this country. You might be asset rich in that you have property, but you are ultimately cash poor.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a massive issue. I'm not blaming pensioners. I'm blaming the system that's created this problem. I think it's awful that pensioners have to have this gamble on whoever's going to be in government for their means to survive. I don't think that's a sustainable system, and it won't be sustainable in the upcoming years when less and less young people will be able to pay for pensioners.
Yeah, so Jess, how would you actually argue then that your state pension should be funded? How do you actually think moving forward we can get to a situation where there is more fairness and equality within the system?
I think individual responsibility and private pensions need to be encouraged further. I don't blame pensioners for going through this. They think it's okay for the state. They believe in the state, and that's one of the main issues. The state isn't the most reliable system. And I think the individual, if there's a pot which you can get at the end of your life, which and you've built up, I think that's the very best system. And there should be support for vulnerable people, vulnerable old people. And we need to explore that. But just having this system where everyone gets it, it's not sustainable.
OK, Monica, then, the point that you raised earlier about there being this pot that we all pay into, the idea that there's national insurance contributions and all of these other things that are a protected pot for the individual, that's actually sold to us all. This idea has been sold to us all, but it's not actually the case. It's not actually true. Is that the problem, that there's just a general pot of taxation and not one isolated one for the individual themselves?
I think that's why I distinguish the line between benefits and a state pension, because I think a lot of people like to put those ideas into one pot and call it the same kettle of fish, and it's not. I personally am a big advocate of less state intervention in many areas of government spending. For example, I don't favour the benefit system as a whole. I don't think it's acceptable that people have children when they can't even afford to feed themselves. However, that's not the same thing when it comes to state pensions. And as I said, these people have worked incredibly hard, or even if they haven't worked incredibly hard, they've spent a lifetime, they've gone through a lot more than a young 20-something person has, who has no real life experience, has not had to see the world yet. So again, for me, it's just a sort of mindset of self-indulgence where you're putting your needs above those who raised you and gave you the priorities and the opportunities that you have today. And I think it's young people taking that for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of my viewers will be saying, well, actually, I worked damn hard to buy my house, thank you very much, when interest rates were a lot higher than they are today.